right. Well, thank you so much for having me. I did bring my Kleenexes. I can't promise that the presentation will be without tears, but that's okay too. Just really appreciate your church's prayer and support before the war started and since. Make sure I'm on here. Just give a little bit of background for those of you who maybe weren't here when I shared before or don't know. I do serve with ABWE, that's Association of Baptists for World Evangelism. Have been serving in Ukraine for 12 years and have been involved in medical evangelism, and I'll share a little bit more about what we do with that, pro-life ministry, and also assisting with a church plant. But I thought I would start with more recent events because I know that's what is on everyone's mind, and then kind of back up a little bit more to the ministries that I've been involved in and what's happening with them now. But as you all know, the world for everyone in Ukraine drastically changed on February 24th. There's a lot that has happened in the days since, and as I considered how to share, I was just reminded again and again of the one constant in the before and after story is God's goodness and faithfulness, and even the ways that he was preparing us beforehand, the ways he's been gracious to bring some good things about in the midst of the heartache. And God is faithful. And just to give you a bit more of a background, I'll show you a map. We knew you probably had seen on the news and maybe were concerned that I was still in Ukraine. There was growing tensions leading up to the 24th. There was troop buildup on the borders. Our team had been working on a contingency plan. What should we do? Should we leave? The end of January, the embassy recommended that all Americans leave. We're pulling out their staff. There had been troop buildup on our borders before. It wasn't the first time. This time it seemed like there were more. There were a lot more warnings coming from other governments. Our embassy had never left. So we did understand that this time it seemed more serious. And with the troop buildups, especially on the northern border, we had a family and a single who were living in Kyiv, which is in the capital, and you probably can't see. I don't know if there's a pointer on here. Yeah. Doesn't work. Okay. Oh, yeah, not on the. Okay. But Kyiv is up in the north, and given the proximity of the troops and the difficulties of getting out of Kyiv and over the bridges in a moment of crisis, they decided to leave in mid-February. Our team leader has 5 kids, ranging in age from like 6 to 14, and then we had the single gal that worked with them. So they, mid-February, went to Hungary to kind of wait out, hoping that they'd wait out the tensions and be able to come back. My teammates and I live in Odessa, Claire in the south, and Sukro family and we had decided we were far enough away from the borders. We had border of another country not too far from us that we could continue to wait there. We kind of suspected that we were beginning to feel that something was going to happen, but really felt like it was probably going to be more of a push in the north or the east, and we would have time to react. We didn't quite expect what happened on the 24th. I don't know if you can see from where you're sitting, but all the little red dots on that map are places where missiles fell that first day, including Odessa. And so I woke up at 5 a.m. to a phone call from my teammates saying the Russians are attacking and there's been missile strikes all over the country. And while we were still on the phone, we heard a distant explosion from one that hit in Odessa. We made a plan that I would join them at their house as soon as it was daylight. This is a picture of us near noon eating some soup. And initially, we were trying to get a feel for the situation. Where are the troops? Is it safe for us to leave, or should we shelter in place? Heard several more explosions throughout that morning. But by about 11 o'clock was the last one that we heard, and we had been in touch with some other people who had made the decision to head for the Moldovan border, said that the roads were clear and they were almost to the border, and so we, after lunch, made the decision that we needed to leave and packed up their car. And a trip that usually takes about an hour to get to the border, about 3 hours to get to the capital where we had contacts, took us about 24 hours. We got to the border. There was about a 7-kilometer line of cars waiting. We ended up waiting at the border through the night. But the next day, about 2 o'clock in the afternoon, we finally made it across the border and had teammates with ABW that worked in Moldova that met us, along with their national pastor, a Moldovan pastor. It was a sense of relief, but also great sadness. It's not an easy thing to leave. And I, maybe we'll talk a little bit more at the end. No hero. I was scared as anybody else when you hear the explosions, but leaving and not knowing if you'll ever be able to go back and what's going to happen to your friends. But even as we were on the border, waiting to get across, we were in touch with friends who were also making plans to leave or send out their wives and children. The Suko family that I work with, they had about a year before started an international church. They had been ministering. There's a lot of international students that come to study at the universities in Odessa from Africa and India and Middle East. And most of the students they had been working with wanted to leave. So in the following days, the first kind of wave of refugees that we helped didn't look like Ukrainians. They were mostly from Africa, some from India. The church in Moldova very quickly organized to take in refugees into their little church and transporting people to and from the border and doing everything they could to help. Also, within the first few days, I had been in touch with leaders in my church, and they were wanting to send out some of their wives and children, so was able to help arrange transportation and meet. In the following days, a number of ladies from my church came through. Some of them had contacts further on. I just helped them make connections. Some of them had nowhere to go, and we ended up getting them settled somewhere in Moldova. The one couple there is pictured. Ukraine, within the first 24 hours, made it illegal for the men to leave between the ages of 18 and 60. This family, the man was able to leave because they had just recently adopted, and that was one of the exceptions they gave. Adoptive families could leave. But even in that, I saw the Lord's graciousness of allowing me to feel like I was still there for my church. Several of the men tell me they don't know if they'd have had the courage to send their wives off if they didn't know that I was waiting to meet them. But there was growing tension in Moldova as well. There was fear that in those early days the Russian army was moving quickly, and if they took over Ukraine, that they probably would roll on into Moldova. There's also a breakout republic in Moldova, a little strip of land that has declared their independence from Moldova and has been backed by Russia for years. And so there was concern that for the safety of Moldova. Plus, our team, missionary team in Romania, had also been seeing floods of refugees come in, had begun working with them, and didn't have enough Russian speakers to work with them. And so they were asking if maybe some of our teammates could come help them. So after just over 2 weeks of being in Moldova, I made the move to Romania and took two of the ladies from my church with me that had been there in Moldova. The church there was willing to continue caring for them. They'd actually given them an apartment they could live in. But when I told them I was getting ready to move to help in Romania, that the Romania team had said that they would be welcome to come. They'd find a place for them there, or they could stay in Moldova. And they made the decision to go with me. And the Lord provided an apartment through missionaries with our mission who had recently moved to another city but still had their apartment in Bucharest. They let us use it, so I was able to live with these two ladies from my church and their children, and was just grateful for that time the Lord gave us. It's been a lot of crying, but also laughing and praying together and encouraging each other. Those ladies became very special to me. While I was in Romania, I was able to assist with their ministry to refugees. Several churches and a couple of nonprofit organizations had come together, at least 5 churches and two nonprofits, and they had a transit center at the Central Baptist Church where they housed the majority of people that were coming and going. They had set up a church camp on the outskirts of Bucharest to house people longer term, and then had a few other larger houses where they were also housing people longer term. And so I was able to assist at the church just with translation, helping figure out if people had plans to move on to another country or if we needed to help them find a place in Romania, answer questions that they had. Most of the pastors we worked with and most of the young people in Romania speak English. So that's what allowed me to be of help as a translator because I don't know Romanian. But was able to serve in that way, and sometimes not even translating, just being around at the church to visit with people and to give hugs and hear stories as they try to make decisions about what they should do next. And that church organization also began doing convoys initially to the border and then across the border, taking supplies into Ukraine and then bringing refugees back. And I was able to help with a number of those convoys as well. And was special to be involved in helping make connections with my Ukrainian partners and even meeting up with some of them when we crossed the border. Also to be there to calm fears that, as we picked up refugees at the border, because the majority were women and children and elderly. And the majority driving the convoys were men. Having a female that spoke Russian went a long way to calming their fears. So I was grateful that the Lord gave me the opportunity to serve in that way. I want to show you a video. I don't know that it will play. Yeah, I probably have to go out of the PowerPoint and play. That was put together just to give you an overall feel for the ministry in Bucharest. I've been extremely grateful to the Romanian church and missionary partners, but also just the Romanian believers and what they've been doing to reach out to the Ukrainians.
Потом начались обстрелы. И так день за днем бомбоубежище. С 3-го этажа спускаемся на день и по 5 бывало раз, и по 3 раза. Ночевали все время там, потому что очень страшно. Очень страшно. Это не передать словами. Просто не передать словами. Только приходим, тревога, конец тревоги. Только приходим, поднимаемся домой. Опять тревога. Опять с 3-го этажа бежим туда. А ночь, естественно, чтобы быть в каком-то спокое поспать, потому что стены трясутся, дом трясется. Это же напряжение, это нервы какие-то психологические. Выдержать это надо. Будем терпеть, бороться. Я ей сказала, что ты только прожила, не стоит жить, если тебя не будет. Она говорит, я за вас спокойна, что вы спокойная обстановка здесь. Что вы не спите, вы держите. Это бороться всегда тебя. Держишь.
This church and another 5 churches from Bucharest and 2 associations that we worked before in different projects. We were just talking between us and saying, okay, if the war is getting worse, if this situation will get higher, if the people will come to Romania, what we should do? So we said, let's go on Sunday and present in our churches some of our talks, and we will see what the churches will say.
I think within a day or two of the beginning of the war, we met on Zoom at that time, and we decided we had to do something. And instead of doing something individually as individual churches, we decided to continue and deepen our cooperation and start this venture called UBC, Ukrainian Bucharest Churches.
We had planned on having another meeting to discuss what we were going to do, and that was going to take place on Wednesday. But on Monday morning, refugees showed up on the doorstep of the church.
The first day, we just went to IKEA and buy some mattresses. I called one of my colleagues, Chris, and said, Chris, can you go and buy some mattresses? And he just bought some mattresses, and that's how we started.
we get a call from the train station or the bus station, one of the different bus stations, and there's a refugee there that has gotten our number from a pastor or another missionary that they've known. And so we get a volunteer from one of the churches, we send them over, they find the individual or individuals and bring them back to the church, and that's how it begins. In other cases, we send a convoy in Ukraine and Moldova delivering food and supplies, and then on the return we will pick up refugees from the border and bring them back to the church. The trip to and from the border takes some time. The policemen stated a number of protocols to protect against human trafficking, which they have to sign in when they get to the border. They have to sign out. The police need to know who they're going with.
We bring food. We bring stuff for kids like Pampers, whatever they need. Actually, they are giving us a list. We don't want to just go and lose money and just go take food to be spoiled. We are asking every week when we go, give us a list. What are your current needs? Because next week we'll come again. You can tell us the current needs on that week. Also through this convoys and this ministry that we do, we had a chance to see also the situation of the churches in those areas. And we just found out a lot of pastors and elders that need help. So it's not just going there and taking trainings and giving food. We see there a lot of perspective in helping the local church from Moldova and from Ukraine after the war was done to go there and help them build the kingdom of God and grow the churches there and do this.
Назад и вперед. Остались очень трудные для нас. Они молодые тоже и уже дали трудно, а для меня старые и мы очень трудно. Очень.
Неизвестно, что дальше, что делать, если куда ехать, очень много каких-то мыслей приходит, ситуаций плохих, и думаешь, куда идти, что делать, к кому обращаться, и будет ли вообще это будущее. Пытаюсь верить в то, что мы скоро вернемся домой, что это скоро закончится, и муж выпустят.
One thing that I've observed is how difficult it is to make any decision. None of the options are what they really want. They want to just go home to a peaceful Ukraine. And so they almost at times feel paralyzed. I need to decide between this and this, and I don't know where one.
There's so much uncertainty. What do we do now? Where do we go? What's going to happen? And how do you direct people in that? The only thing you can do is turn them back to the thing that's most certain, which is God, and His faithfulness, and His love, and His care. And sometimes it's just one day at a time. Sometimes it's just, what am I going to do today, tonight?
We've never been trained how to do work with refugees, but we're open to for God to use us.
Who will do the cleaning for the toilets this week? I want to see some hands. Some hands will just rise. Okay, who will do the cooking this week for the refugees? With some hands. And he said, okay, who will do, I don't know, driving the car, putting beds, cleaning down, and hands were just raising up from the people, from the place. And he said, okay, there are a few people willing to help. 800 volunteers involved in this project. 800 volunteers.
What I've seen in Romania is God working through churches. Hospitality is help for strangers, and that's exactly what's happening. As they're taking in women, children, elderly, and helping them get to safe spaces where they can go, they can heal, worship God, and for some of them perhaps for the first time. That's just something only a church can do.
The gospel is the engine of what we do. From day one, we realized that we get to be the hands and feet of Jesus and to
like guests. They're not refugees for us, but guests. So we try to make them understand that they are welcome here. In the same time, every day at 8 o'clock we have a time of prayer. Since the beginning, we started to have a time of prayer with them here, with all of them who want to join the meeting. So we have translators, we sing, we have a word from the Bible, like the devotional, and prayer time. Because we think that more than the food that we give them and a safe place, they need safe and they need Jesus like their Savior.
Basically, we validate what they're going through. We validate their hurt, their pain, their anger, their anxiety, because I think the Bible does that. So I've spent a lot of time in the Psalms with the refugees, just going through what David experienced when he was persecuted, and then we bring the hope of the gospel, where every psalm ends on a high note, because in spite of the circumstances, David turns his face towards God.
People together to pray, people together to lean on each other. I think of Job's friends, the first 7 days, they just gathered around him and were silent and just were with him. And that's often what we need now.
Well, I know that this is not God's purpose. I know that God is a God of peace. But I believe that even during this time of persecution and everything that is happening, I believe that God is showing each one of the Ukrainians, hey, no matter what happened, no matter if this horrible thing is going on, I am with you. I am with you no matter where you go. Like, even if you have to live to the ends of the earth, I am with you anywhere. So I believe that God can show people that He is real, He's there for them in a different way that He was not able to because of this. So I hope that each one of the Ukrainians feels God's love during this time. I feel that I am so honored to be able to be here. I'm gonna miss everyone. Like, whenever people leave, I feel like a part of me is breaking. So I just I want to know that they're good, that where they're going, they're gonna be taken care of. So I ask them all the time, hey, how are you?
Спасибо Богу, что мы есть такие люди, которые нас приняли и уважают нас. Это вообще самое-самое-самое, что есть в этом свете.
Go back to the PowerPoint. I'm just so grateful for the Romanian church and the way they've opened their hearts. Made some very special friends serving with that group of believers and just seeing their love. The older couple that you saw, they actually lived with a family there in Bucharest, and she was a believer, he was not. But during their time there, he began reading the Bible and attending their small group. And I don't know yet if he's accepted Christ, but the family he was living with said that they'd never seen someone read the Bible with such hunger. So we see God working in hearts as well. Moving on, was able to help there in Bucharest and with some of the trips to the border, but since the Russian troops were not able to advance as quickly as they thought they would, in fact, began pulling away from Kyiv and some areas in Ukraine. Odessa early on had a lot of missile strikes, but they were becoming less, and they only had guided missile strikes. They hadn't had aerial bombings. The troops hadn't been able to get close enough for indiscriminate firing into the city. Most of the missile strikes were on infrastructure or military targets, although that's never exact, and there had been some civilian targets as well. But my teammates, the Sukos, who I had left with, he had decided to make a few weekend trips into Odessa, and I began praying about whether or not the Lord would have me go on some of those trips. And so in May, we were able to make a couple of weekend trips, and then we did a 10-day trip where they actually took their whole family, their 3 kids that are still at home with them, and we're able to go back into Odessa. And I want to tell you a little bit more about those trips, but I think for them to understand their significance, I want to back up a little bit and just explain a bit more about the ministry that I've been involved in Ukraine. I mentioned medical evangelism, have been involved in mobile medical clinics into the village areas in Ukraine. This ministry was started by Dr. Miriam Wheeler, a doctor with our mission, who she arrived in Ukraine in 2000. She left Ukraine, retired. Well, she moved to the Home Office to become medical director, but had to leave Ukraine because of some health issues in 2019. We had been hoping and praying that God would send another doctor to take her place. I'm a family nurse practitioner, but so I could continue the ministry, but just going from 2 providers to 1, and then the other things I was involved in. But Lord hasn't seen fit to provide that yet. But so we did decrease the number of clinics. We had between 5 and 6 clinics a month that we were doing. We have villages. We go once a month to a village for 2 to 5 years. There's been a few places where we stayed a bit longer than that, depending on the needs. But in order to build relationships, help us to do the teaching and make advances in their understanding of their medical diagnosis, but also to build relationships and really be able to share the gospel and to come alongside. We always ministered in a village where there was a church or a local pastor evangelist trying to start a church, and the Lord used these visits to help open doors. People that wouldn't just walk into the church or were very suspicious about the evangelicals. They kind of viewed them more as a cult. Ukraine is more primarily Eastern Orthodox, and viewed evangelical churches in the same category as like the Jehovah's Witness and the Mormons. And so it gave us the opportunity to visit with people that otherwise would not have opened their doors to us. And sometimes even home visits. Pictured there is one of the pastors who travels with us, visiting in a home as we took some medications. And also sometimes we would have medical teams that would come, bring a specialty dentist or a eye doctor, and the crowds that would gather as well gives opportunity to often start the clinic day with a sermon, share the gospel with patients. This is, let's just skip. The pastor at one of the newest villages that we went to, just to give you an idea, it was a church that had been there for quite some time but had dwindled down to almost nothing. The pastor that had kind of started the work was elderly, couldn't always go out, so they had different pastors that would visit at different times. This young man had recently finished seminary, and the church that had kind of taken this Odessa church that had kind of taken responsibility for this village church asked him if he would start doing outreach there. And as he started, he realized that in order to really be effective, I need to move my family out there. So he moved his family from the big city out to the village, and asked if we'd be interested in using our clinics to help them build relationships in the community. So we started doing a clinic in that little church, and it was neat to see as they moved out and began building relationships, as we were able to show God's love through the clinics, how hearts were softened. Some of the people began attending church, and I know of at least one of the elderly ladies that accepted Christ as her Savior in the last couple of years. We have a staff of Ukrainians who help us, a couple of drivers, a deacon and a pastor who drive and help us with evangelism. So Ukrainian ladies that help us with handing out meds. And when I was back in Ukraine in May, we were able to sort through our storeroom and give away some of the remaining meds that we had to the Ukrainian Christian Medical Association, who had begun doing some. They occasionally did outreaches before, but have been since the war started doing more outreaches into some of the needy areas. And also we had since 2014, when the conflict began, we'd been doing some outreaches in eastern Ukraine, areas where people had been displaced because of the fighting, and so we have partners in eastern Ukraine that we had worked with in medical ministry. And just to give you a brief update on some of them, that's where the fighting is most intense right now. About a month ago, one of the cities that we had lived in and done outreach from there was taken over by the Russians. The man in the helmet there is the deacon whose home we stayed in, who would drive us around to all the places we went to. He moved his family to western Ukraine early on in April or May, but he's been going back, bringing supplies and helping evacuate people. Still, he'll take a week or so break in western Ukraine, and then he'll go back, he and his older son. Other of the pastors that we worked with, one of them had become a chaplain back in 2014 and has basically been embedded in the army and ministering to soldiers. The couple down in the right corner, also a pastor and his wife that we had worked with, they had to leave their home, but they've gotten involved in a church in western Ukraine that's helping with refugees and are continuing to minister. Recently texted me that they were able to baptize a couple of their church members who evacuated to the same area that were ready to follow the Lord in baptism. So it's heartbreaking, but it's also encouraging to see how God is using our brothers and sisters there. I mentioned the Christian... Ukrainian Christian Medical Association. We've been building a relationship with them. We had been at some of their conferences. I knew the local chapter in Odessa had been to a few of their meetings. We'd invited some of their doctors to work with us, but it was kind of a hit and miss relationship. But since the war started, we've been able to they've been very active at trying to get medications to those who need it among the refugees, as well as to some of the military and the hospitals. We've been able, with some of the crisis fund, to help buy medications, get them into Ukraine through the Christian Medical Association. And the local chapter in Odessa, I handed off all the meds that we had left to them. And when I was talking to the leader of the Odessa chapter, while I was in Odessa, I said, how else can we help you? What can we do? And she says, we need providers. Holly, can you just stay and travel with us? So as hard as it is to say, well, no, I have to leave again, but I was also encouraged by the growing relationship there. And I think in the future, perhaps the medical ministry will be a bit more of a combination of our efforts along with our Ukrainian brothers and sisters. So excited about that. I also want to tell you more about the pro-life ministry. Dr. Miriam Wheeler also helped us with founding that. And just over 4 years ago, God provided us with our own building, which we were very thankful for. It has 3 main branches. We have the Women's Center, where we care for women with crisis pregnancies, a post-abortion healing ministry, and seminars for youth abstinence. When Dr. Miriam left, I became the president of our organization, and she was chairman of our board, turned that over to a local pastor, Pastor Igor Kucher, and just see the Lord's hand in that as well, because currently he's the only one of our leadership still in Ukraine. It's just how the Lord was working. We saw it as a step forward, moving our organization to become more Ukrainian, but God was also using that to prepare us to be ready during time of war. Just to give you a bit of an overview of the ministry, we have post-abortion healing ministry. That was actually started in 2011 before we even opened the center. In Ukraine, during the Soviet Union, it was said the average woman had 7 abortions. The number of abortions has decreased in Ukraine in recent years, more because of teaching and the availability of contraception, not because the mindset has really changed. There's still average of 500 abortions a day, and just in my personal contact with women, I'd say the average woman has at least 1 abortion still. So in preparing women to serve in our pro-life ministry, we realized that a number of them had abortions in their past, and so we began offering this course. There's a copy of it on the table if you want to look at it, just to really a course that God has used to help women see that God's forgiveness covers every part of their life, and to help them understand God's forgiveness for them. Here. We also have been developing abstinence teaching ministry. That was something during my last term that I really wanted to see developed. I've been praying that God would help us to form a team. God gave me those 3 ladies there on the left that helped me develop the material, and I was working on preparing one of them to become the leader. We weren't quite there yet. I was wanting to hand off the leadership of that part of the ministry, and not sure exactly where that's kind of on hold at the moment, but we were to the point where we had done a lot of teaching in youth groups and church settings, and we're wanting to transition into getting into some of the public schools. So we'll see what the Lord has for that in the future. The main heart of the ministry is our pregnancy care center. Call it the Women's Center, where we offer help to women with crisis pregnancies, sometimes single women, sometimes women with already 3 or 4 children that don't think they can handle another pregnancy, maybe without work. We've also had refugees from eastern Ukraine. And we offer counseling classes, childbirth preparation classes. Before COVID hit, we were doing a once-a-month mom's club with child care. Maybe someday we can start that back up again. But the heart of that work is working one-on-one with the women and providing them with emotional support and with the goal of introducing them to Christ. We usually start with a parenting class because that's non-threatening to them. They come one-on-one and meet with a counselor and work through the parenting course, and with the goal of eventually them agreeing to do a Bible study with us. And we use for the Bible study the story of hope and the way to joy. I have those on my table too if you want to look at those. It's a chronological look at Scripture, helping them to see the big story of the Bible. And we have had clients who chose life for their baby initially and then went on to accept Christ as their Savior. We have also had a transition in leadership there. We had the director who was with us from the beginning, ended up moving to the States with her family. So we have Tanya, who's pictured there on the left, who recently became the director. And we had a board meeting the night before the invasion and had appointed Natasha on the right as our assistant director. Our director is currently in Moldova with her family, and the assistant director that we had just appointed, who hadn't even started work yet, is in Germany, but they're both praying about when or if God would bring them back. And I have to believe that God allowed us to have that board meeting for a reason. So I still believe that someday Natasha will be active in serving as our assistant director as well. Just to give you a couple quick stories, we had just the week before the invasion, a young couple come in. They were international students. And she was from Morocco, he was from Egypt, so they were Muslim. She had found out she was pregnant, but it was already pretty late term, and that's why they ended up at our center, because they were trying to find someone who'd be willing to do a late term abortion. So we were able to talk with them about the risks and try to encourage them to think about support that was out there for them. We weren't sure. When they left, we really were pretty sure they were just still going to go try to find someone who would do the abortion for them. But just a few days before the invasion, we had tried to call and text, and we finally got a text from him, and he said, "Don't worry, everything's okay. The baby will be fine." And that's the last contact we had with them. We don't know where they ended up after the invasion, but I have to believe that God brought them our way for a reason as well. Others that we've had, I'll tell you, there's a number of stories I could tell, but for time, I'll move on. But when I was in Odessa in May, we've not been able to keep the center open for its regular hours. A lot of our volunteers have also left the country, but we've been encouraging them to try to maintain contact with their clients through phone calls and texts. And those that are still in Odessa, we've been able to open the center a couple times a week. And they can come in and get food or diapers, or a couple times a month, not a week. So when I was in Odessa in May, I was able to help with our volunteers that we still had, kind of organize better what we were doing at the center, send some packages to clients who were in other parts of Ukraine. I'm very thankful for our volunteers who are still in Odessa, who are willing to help. And while I was there, I also had the opportunity to connect with some of our former clients who their children are already older than 3 years. They don't come regularly to the clinic anymore, but I knew that they still had difficult situations. They came in and got help. I was able to invite several of them to church and telling them that they could get more help through the church. And several of them came, and one of the ladies, Oksana, who's the one on your right, came to church while I was in Odessa and continued going. She's one that had gone through the story of hope, the way to joy, seemed to understand but just wasn't ready to accept Christ. Her little baby that she had when she first came to our center is now already 7 years old, so we've been working with her for a number of years. She came to church when I was there in May, continued attending, and within a few weeks of my leaving, I got a text from one of our deacons to say that she had prayed to accept Christ, and she just recently was baptized. So it's been exciting to see some long-term fruit that God has brought even through the war. This is a Zoom meeting with some of our volunteers. We've tried to maintain contact, encourage them. It's neat to see how God is using some of them scattered all around the world, allowing some to counsel in a pregnancy care center in Germany or to provide counseling to Ukrainians who are in need wherever they're at. would ask you to pray for wisdom as we think going forward, whether or not some of our leadership's able to go back in and we can work more regularly at the center, or if there's other things that we need to try to do online to support our volunteers and clients. Probably one of the most exciting parts for me is my church. I started working in a new church back in 2020. I had been praying about moving to a different church when I had been working in a church downtown about an hour bus ride from where I was living, and was feeling more and more that I needed to work closer to home because of clients that I had relationships with at the center and wanting to invite people to church. And the Lord directed me to this Fellowship of Believers. The church they've been doing outreach in the area about 7 years, but officially formed as a church about 3.5 years ago. And just a really neat group of mostly first-generation believers who really had a heart to reach their little part of the city with the gospel, and was able to join with them and be involved in some music ministry, discipleship, and ladies ministry. Had the joy of being involved in discipling two ladies, especially Jana there in the middle and Lisa on the right. They were baptized within that first year I was there, so I was able to go through Bible study and work with them. Alexandra in the purple, she came sometimes to our Bible studies because of her work. I wasn't able to work with her one-on-one really intensely, but she had a heart for one of the young girls that came to our church, so I was able to kind of mentor and encourage her in trying to reach out to this young girl. And Lisa, who's pictured again there on the left, she just really, when we started doing the discipleship, she was a brand new believer, didn't know much, but she just ate up all that we were talking about and asked great questions. And she had developed a friendship with a gal that lived in her area who had started asking her a lot of spiritual questions as well. And she would come to me and say, she asked me this question, this is what I told her, and just pray the Lord will help me have the right answers for her. And I challenged her to think about, well, maybe you should offer her the same Bible study that we've done with you. And she's like, you think I could do that? And I think I told her, well, I'll help you prepare, but yeah, I think you could. And so she had just started meeting with her in January, and now they're both in different countries. And as far as I know, the young girl hadn't yet accepted Christ, but it was neat to see Lisa take that step of being ready to begin discipling someone else and sharing her faith with them. Also was able to do ladies ministry in my home and host a small group. And that ties in a bit more to when I was back in May. But first I want to tell you, within the first few days of the war, my church decided just to open the doors of the church and gather people for a time of prayer and to serve a hot meal. And they started doing that 5 or 6 days a week initially, and then realizing there were needs in the community, they started doing food packets for those who had need. And you can see down in the corner, in the first days, the number of people that they would have coming. But within a matter of a week or so, they were completely filling up the little storefront room that we rented, and having to do multiple services because there were so many people, even if it wasn't their turn to get a food packet, had that desire to be there and to hear the singing and the time of prayer and the preaching. And within a matter of a month or so, they decided that they needed to rent another space. God provided another building. They ended up having to go kind of outside their region to another region to find a place, but pretty soon we're filling up that larger building as well. But it's been a blessing to have the additional space there. They're continuing to hold their Sunday services there and have space there to do Sunday school and have fellowships. There's several rooms in the facility they're renting. But they kept the storefront where we started because they had people there that they didn't think would come to this other part of still our part of town, but far enough away they thought some people would leave. So they're continuing to do a couple days a week at the one location, and a couple Sundays, and then a couple days a week at the new location. And I asked Pastor when I was there if they thought they would eventually just move all to the bigger location. And he said, well, no, actually, I see this eventually being 2 church plants. So it's neat to see, in the midst of all the uncertainty, that God still has given him a burden to see churches planted. And it's been neat to see the fruit. What initially started out as more evangelistic, providing hot meals, sharing the gospel, they've had people that want to come every time the doors are open, want to go deeper, and so they've started a number of Bible studies. And when I was there, the ladies from our church asked if we couldn't have a ladies get together like we did. So I gathered the ladies that were still there, a few of the newer ladies that started coming. We had a little Bible study fellowship time after I left. Natasha, who's pictured there in the corner, she texted me. She's been very involved in organizing a lot of what our church is doing, especially with the meals and the food packets. And she said, the ladies are coming to me and asking when we're going to do a ladies get together again. What should I do? And so I encouraged her, well, I think you could do it. She's an elementary school teacher. She's never taught any adults, but I encouraged her that I thought she could do it and recommended a book that she could use, and ordered the material for her. And so they started meeting. Now they're meeting twice a month, and they just have more and more ladies coming each time. And it's just been exciting to see how God has used Natasha. She was very nervous initially, but how excited she is about the way the Lord is using her and blessing that outreach. And so I had mentioned that Oksana was baptized in my church a couple weeks ago, along with 12 other people. My church baptized 13 people, and it's so exciting to see what God's doing. Some of them, like Oksana, that I've known for a long time. One of them was one of our teenagers from one of our families at church that we were all concerned about whether or not he was going to stay with the Lord or not. But since the war started, he's really gotten serious about his walk with the Lord. A couple of people that had come off and on to our church for a couple of years, but never had made a commitment, that decided to follow the Lord. A few people that I met when I was there in May that had just started coming since the war started, some that I don't even know personally. But it's been exciting to see what God is doing and bringing people to Christ. And the story is repeated all over Ukraine. My church isn't unique. We're hearing stories from my co-workers' churches and other churches as they've begun serving their communities and opening their doors. People are searching for answers, and they're coming. So I'd ask you to continue to pray. Pray for, of course, we want peace. We want an end to the war, but also just pray that God will give stamina to the believers who are serving, some of them in very difficult places, and that God would strengthen the faith of the new believers, that they be rooted and grounded in the faith. We've had discussions within the leadership of the church too, how having lots of new believers in your church gets messy. Children in the faith sometimes act like children in the faith, but the Lord would just give wisdom and strength to those who are left in the church as they seek to disciple and encourage them. And appreciate those who have given and supported what God is doing there. And looking forward, I hope that maybe someday we can invite teams to come and help us with rebuilding. And there are needs among the work with the refugees still. If anyone is interested in making a trip, let me know. I do hope to return. Obviously don't know what will happen in Ukraine in the coming days, but if things stay quiet in Odessa the way they are at this point, I would definitely consider going back. My teammates, the Sukos, are actually planning to go back the end of August. They say if things become more unstable in Odessa, they might move up to the capital, which at this point seems more secure. But are just trusting the Lord. I will be in the States at least through the end of January, trying to visit all my churches. I was due for a furlough when I visit all the churches that support me, and then we'll see how the Lord leads from there. And when I was thinking about what to share, there are a number of things that have been on my heart, things that the Lord has been working on me and teaching me, but just thought I would share with you some of the things that the Lord did in my heart in the very early days when, before we had the joy of seeing some of the good things that God was bringing out of the hardness. You have to put your faith into practice when life all around seems dark and hard and you can't believe that God would let this happen. But I think back to a conversation that I had with the ladies from my church. It was just a few days into the war. They had just left Ukraine. There were 3 ladies at that point living in an apartment the church had provided, all from my church, all with little children. There's 3 ladies and 5 little kids in the apartment. And I had gone the second day after they got there just to see how they were doing and what I could do to help them. And one of the ladies who is the deacon's wife in our church, she said, "Holly, what do I do? I know God is there and we're supposed to have faith in him, but sometimes the anxiety just overwhelms me." And we just sat and talked and cried together and talked about the things that the Lord is showing us. And I would say in those early days, the places in Scripture where I gravitated to was the Psalms. And just reminding myself of who God says He is, even if I don't feel it today. And so I encouraged her with that. And then the Lord brought to mind, I had been working on memorizing or rememorizing Philippians 4. And this is a reminder to me again of how important it is to have those habits in our life of scripture reading and memorization, so the Lord can bring to mind when He needs to those verses. And as I was trying to think how to answer her, how to encourage these ladies, the Lord brought to my mind Philippians 4, starting with verse 6, be anxious for nothing, but in everything by prayer and supplication with thanksgiving let your requests be made known to God. And the peace of God which surpasses all understanding will guard your hearts and minds through Christ Jesus. And in that moment when I can't control the anxiety in my heart, but what does God tell me to do? And I took the ladies back to that verse. I said, what does it tell us to do? We take our requests to the Lord in prayer. Just tell Him all about it. Like we read in the Psalms, David brought his complaints to the Lord. All those feelings in your heart that you don't know what to do with, the questions, just take it to the Lord in prayer. That's what He tells us to do. And then thanksgiving. And I said, what can we thank the Lord for? And we started remembering how He had helped them get across the border. It was a hard trip. How He provided an apartment for them to live in. How their husbands and families were still okay, that were back in Odessa, that there hadn't been any hits in our part of town. We're just remembering the things that we did have to be thankful for in the midst of a hard thing. And it's true. You may have to repeat this over and over many times in the same day, but when we put into practice the verses that God's given us, He does bring His peace. And when you go on, finally, brethren, whatever things are true, whatever things are noble, whatever things are just, think on these things. And just reminding our hearts time and time again to think on the truths that we know about God and His faithfulness. And just wanted to share that moment when the verses that we know probably by heart become very practical, and they're true. And the Lord does bring His peace when we take our problems to Him and look to Him. So my time is going away quickly, but if you have questions, I would be happy to answer questions. We can take a few minutes while we're here all together, or later on as well.
Does anyone have a question right now? We can maybe at fellowship time, please feel free to get that. Any questions that you remind me to do that at fellowship.
Yeah. All right. Well, thank you very much for your prayers, for your interest, and for your faithful support. And very grateful for your church.
Holly, thank you so much for sharing and taking your time to do so. I just so appreciate that.